Hello, my name is Barbora Černušáková. I'm a human rights researcher working on the intersection of academia and activism. And today we will talk about the changing world of work, specifically about the growing mass of workers who find themselves in low-paid, irregular jobs with lack of workers' rights protection. The outsourced cleaners, the self-employed care workers, informal construction workers, or, and this will be the topic of today's conversation, drivers of app-based companies. Both in the UK and London, where both I and our guest today, Yaseenem Aslamem, live, and in the Czech Republic or in other places in Europe, the growing ranks of precarious workers have an important but often omitted characteristic. They are racialized. Workers of migrant backgrounds, workers coming from ethnic minorities, they are the ones who are overrepresented among low-paid, hard, and often stigmatized jobs. And what we will do today is to unpack why, and also to discuss how can they organize and get organized in order to pursue better working conditions and their interests. I would like to invite you for both an observation of the world of work around you and a reflection of it. And in order to do so, I'll try to start with a few remarks. In the past few decades, we have seen the contraction of the demand for manufacturing labor, mostly in the global north. And although the Czech Republic has not been as severely affected as, for example, the UK, the manufacturing in the Czech Republic still accounts for around 35% of the employment, whereas in the UK is only 13% according to Eurostat data. There are locations in the Czech Republic, for example, Ostrava, that have severely suffered the industrialization in the 1990s and beyond. Reflecting these, authors such as Aaron Benanau and the collective Endnotes propose that we have entered a new period in the history of capitalist societies characterized by industrial stagnation and the tendency towards superfluity of a part of working class. So if this is the reality that we live in, the question is, when the demand for labor falls, who must go without? And the experiences of layoffs in factories, but also in other workplaces, teach us that those who are let go in such situations are those that are seen and actually are somewhat on the margins and are seen as disposable. So these are the Roma in Eastern Europe, these are the immigrants in Britain or Southern Europe. In capitalism, a worker is one who depends for selling her waged labor for her survival. It is impossible for any of us to join the generations of unemployed and live on benefits, no matter what the media and politicians try to claim. The neoliberal state is not the welfare state. Those who are left jobless are eligible to very minimal, if any, protection. And basically life in poverty has been powerfully documented by sociologists such as Matthew Desmond or Loic Vacant or filmmakers like Ken Loach. So what happens instead is that people who are pushed out of work have to find some work, no matter how irregular, low-paid, and informal. One such sources of wage labor is the so-called gig economy, and that is going to be focus of our conversation today. In February this year, a group of drivers won a case against Uber in what became a landmark victory in the UK. So after 5 years and 2 appeals, the Supreme Court held that the drivers were workers and not independent contractors, as the company claimed. This means that they are eligible for minimum wage, paid annual leave, or protection from unfair dismissal. The judgment, especially the Supreme Court's theoretical justification of employment relationship, are quite profound and moving. Recognizing that in an employment context, the parties are frequently of very unequal bargaining power, the court powerfully stated that the general purpose of the employment legislation is to protect vulnerable workers from being too little for the work they do, required to work excessive hours, or subjected to other forms of unfair treatment, such as being victimized for whistleblowing. But while the law is interpreted by the Supreme Court and all the other courts in this case has been clear in that the drivers are workers, the practice hasn't. Although Uber said in March that it will treat its drivers as workers and guarantee them the minimum wage and holiday pay, there was one important variation from the Supreme Court's ruling: the working time. Uber stated that it will only count as the working time, the time once a driver accepts the trip. In other words, the waiting time, which considerably grew for the drivers during the pandemic, won't count. This is not consistent with the Supreme Court ruling, which, drawing on the EU and UK law, made it very clear that time spent on calls count as working time. And non-compliance or inadequate compliance with the Supreme Court ruling may lead to licensing authority, which enables Uber to operate. So in London, this would be the Transport for London, TfL. It may lead to a decision not to give company a new license or renew old license. So after the Supreme Court ruling, Uber turned to the High Court seeking a declaratory relief that its business model is compliant with the TfL regulation. As the gig economy platforms are transforming the world of work, in particular the working conditions, the length of a working day, regularity of both work and income, workers in a number of countries in Europe and beyond are successfully challenging the practices of gig economy in courts. I would like to now turn to our guest, who is one of the lead claimants in the case against Uber. But before we will dive into what is it like to work in the gig economy, it would be good if you could tell us a little bit more about what prompted you and what prompted James and other claimants in the case to pursue this action against Uber.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, just to give you a background, I actually come from an IT background. So I graduated in the IT, just like basic first line IT. So around 2006, I was made redundant in my IT job. So I needed to, earn some money while I look for my IT job again. So I went in and I started driving as a mini cab driver, what they call it in London. Yeah. So, and the whole idea was I would work hard on a Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, and that gave me the weekdays to go out and look for my job and go for interviews, etc. But I liked the job I was doing. It was long hours, it was hard work, but it was a lot more money. Like you can make your money, like for example, on a Friday, I would leave home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and come back home 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. So it was long hours, but you made the money, and and it gave me the freedom of weekdays to be at home, that I stopped looking for a job like my IT job, and I continued doing what I was doing as IT. Now, Uber come into London around 2012 when they first launched in London. So in 2013, Uber started their Uber X service, which is the low end of their, the service that we use nowadays. Where in 2012, when they first launched, they launched with the executive service, like the S-Class Mercedes for executive customers. So I was one of the first driver to start working with Uber. When they launched the Uber X service, I was one of the first 100 drivers to be part of the launch. And to be honest, it was amazing. I was getting paid £10 bonus for each job I did. And the thing is, like I mentioned, I started this job in 2006. So for me, it was the same as working for another company. So I was a mini cab driver, like I was a taxi driver, or as they call it in Europe, yeah, or private hire driver, they call it. So for me, it wasn't that I'm a gig worker or an app-based driver. Now, the biggest concern, like we got to look at the pro and the con. Like before Uber, it was all traditional. Like we used to have a human controlling us. So you'll have a person that would dispatch the job to you, and there's a lot of favoritism issues where, like let's say the controller likes you, they'll give you more jobs, and there's all kind of stuff. But the whole idea of Uber was everything like you're in control, you're the boss, there's no favoritism, it's a computer that will give jobs to everyone. But little did we know that, look, this was just, we got looped into something. To start off with, I was making good money, and so were all the drivers. So it's a lot of word of mouth where we went and got out other drivers come and join Uber because of the money we were making. And at the same time, the rates were a lot more higher. And Uber was also giving free promo code to the riders to come and ride the service. So, cut long story short, around 2014, that's when Uber first reduced their fares. And we could see what was happening, because over the time, like from when I started to 2014, they started taking the bonus away. So the bonus went from £10 to £9, £8, etc., all the way down to £1. And then it became the fares. And
Can
then
you repeat that again? That just, so that
So
how did it drop? The drop.
When I started with Uber, the first day, I was, forget what the job was, or how many jobs I did, or what the fare. I was getting £10 for each job I did as a bonus. So let's say the fare was £20 or £5. On top of that, I would get £10. So if I did 10 jobs, I got paid £100 as bonus. So if I did, like the more jobs you, so the point was I was able, like, just the bonus was in double or triple of what our wage would be. So them throwing in money.
And what did you
do? So then they take the bonus away, like slowly it went to £9, £8, £7, £3, like as they grow bigger and bigger. So eventually it went to you got no bonus, but the fares were slightly higher, yeah. And then we started seeing them reduce the fares. Like the fares started going down, down, down. So around 2014, that's when we really started campaigning, because the issue we had is, one, we had a rating system. Like Uber customer to rate the drivers, and there's no way for you to complain, and object to it. So if your rating fell below a certain level, you lose your job. And at the same time, we were seeing drivers getting assaulted. And if, like, let's say I was a driver working for Uber and I got assaulted by a passenger, I had no rights. Uber would do nothing. So if I said to Uber that I got assaulted by this passenger, they would refuse to do anything. If you got assaulted and you went to the police, Uber would, if anything, kick you off the platform when you're the victim. So those were the kind of issues we were having. Like, I was thinking, this can't be right, where we got this big company. If it's the other way around, where a customer gets assaulted or something happens, like they come down heavy on you. But here's an innocent driver, and for years, like I said, this trade has been exploited. It's always been like we always been dealing with awkward people, like drunk people, etc. We get drivers getting murdered, killed. So it's nothing new to the scene. But we were thinking that with Uber, with the technology, it would make it a lot more safer, and we'll have more chance to protect ourselves. If we get a bad rider, they'll get kicked off and all that kind of stuff. So, for example, like James Farrar, he's also the general secretary of Uprising College Union and one of the co-claimants. He got assaulted back in 2015, and he did report it to the police. It took 10 weeks for the police to get a court order from Uber to release the customer's information. Now, like, those were the kind of issues. Now, James did pursue it all the way, but the point was, an average driver, they were sort of happy to take this abuse. So if you got assaulted, to them it's part of my job. I'd rather keep my job and rather have a black eye, as long as I keep my job. So that was a mindset, and that's what I didn't like, and that's what it was all about to start off with. It wasn't about the money, it's more about the respect, the dignity, the safety. And then in 2014, when Uber started reducing the rate, we could see what they're doing, because you could see that they come so aggressively into the market, and they started killing off all these other traditional cab offers, which we left to work to Uber. And now we couldn't go back to them because they were losing, like, they lost their business, because Uber was reducing the fare to attract more customers. And I was talking to the drivers in California, and they were protesting around 2013, and then around 2014 we saw a peak there, and we could see what's happening. And that's when we really started looking into the model. We started organizing around 2014. We had a few meetings with Uber management, but we were like an invisible ghost kind of group, like an organization that wasn't really registered, but we had a structure, like we had an association with 500 members. And around that time, I think Uber had about 1,000 drivers. So we already had 50% of the workforce. Yeah, and now as of today, they probably got 100,000 drivers. But do you understand? Like, we were small, but the point was, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to. We saw Uber, like, we want Uber to succeed. We want to work with Uber.
Can I just pause you there, just for people who don't necessarily are not so much aware of Uber's business model? So from what you're saying, the issue was twofold. It was on one hand that the wages were dropping, but on the other hand, when you felt that you needed the support of whom you perceived as your employer, the support was not coming. Is that accurate?
That's correct. So basically, it was all good saying we're your own boss and everything, we're in control. But what we saw is there's no one, it was non-existent. We were being controlled by a machine, computers, yeah, by an app with no rights. And whenever something went wrong, they would disappear. You know, there was
what
no.
What does it mean, no rights? Sorry to interrupt.
Like when we say right, like one, you have human rights, basic rights, and then when we talk about employment rights, which I'll talk about later in details. But to start off with, it's about like as a human, if I got assaulted, you know, I have rights. I should feel safe in my job, you know, from being assaulted. Especially like a company, if they know I got assaulted, why are they hiding it? Why would I get punished if I got assaulted?
Can you talk about that assault a little? That assault that pushed you?
I mean, assault happens a lot. Like I said, back in the days, we didn't have a rating system. So if I picked you up and dropped you off from A to B, and let's say the fare is £10, and you would probably give me, you know, you give me £10, maybe £2 extra for tip for the great service I done. But at the same time, you know, that all got replaced where people started paying through the app by cards, and the rating system, I mean, the tip system got replaced by star rating. So very often, people or the customer would say, "We'll give you 5-star rating." Okay, that's their way of saying nice. But at the same time, people use that like a sword above our head to control us. So, for example, if I, you know, was rude to them, or for example, if they didn't like me, maybe they didn't like my color or something, they would rate me 4-star or 3-star, 2-star, 1-star. So the point was, you know, like if there was a bad customer where they were racially abusive towards you, you can't do anything, because if you did, or you cancel the job, that affects you. That affects your cancellation rate with Uber. At the same time, as I mentioned, is when you report it to Uber, Uber would automatically get rid of you. But that has slightly changed over time. But it's quite common to see, you know, riders getting attacked. Because don't forget, we deal with a lot of work is mainly late night in the evening, like on a Friday night, Saturday night, and a lot of people sort of go out, you know, pubs, clubs. So it's part of the job where you do have people that are drunk, and sometimes you do come across a gruesome. But the point is, how do you deal with it if something did go wrong? And that's where Uber was lacking with the safety side. Now, if I go back to the traditional cab office, you know, when I used to work for the old companies, if something ever went wrong, let's say I had a bad passenger in my car or a rider was assaulting me, you know, you radio in, and the controller would then see if there's any drivers around that area and ask them to go and, you know, like see what's happening, like protect you or call the police or work with the police to get you that justice. But with Uber, that didn't exist. Now, that was how it all started. But then, as Uber started reducing their fares, and like I met James, we contacted a law firm, you know, and one of the things we said is, look, you know, like the solicitor sort of said, look, you do have rights here, you are workers. Now, in the UK, we have 3 employment status. So we have a self-employed, which means you're truly the boss. You could subcontract your work, you decide how much you want to charge, you decide when you want to work, you don't get no holiday pay, no sick pay. Basically, you get no rights, but you're in control of the business. Then right at the bottom, we have an employee. Now, what an employee is, you basically work for the company. They pay your tax, your national insurance, you get pension, you get maternity, paternity, the right to unfair dismissal, all that kind of stuff, yeah? But we also in the UK have a middle status, which they call the Limb B worker. Now, what a Limb B worker is you're sort of self-employed, but it's a middle status which sits between the self-employed and the employee, where you're entitled to some basic rights. So what that means is, as a self-employed person, you're actually running someone else's business, where in our case, we're running Uber's business. So therefore, we're entitled to the right to earn the minimum wage, which is number 1. Number 2, you're entitled to holiday pay. And as you mentioned, number 3 is the right to not to be discriminated or whistleblowing protection, all that kind. So that's all it is. It's just a basic thing, but you still sort of remain independent, where you do your own tax returns and stuff like that. Yeah. So
And
the point.
Did Uber comply with this ruling?
Well, this is it. So when we went into the tribunal, we filed a case in 2015. We had the tribunal here in 2016. And in 2016, we won. So that was like, the break point that we are workers. In fact, we have these rights. And Uber did know what it was. Now, the good thing about our case was it was more about, Uber had these great contracts. For example, I received my payment from Uber BV in Holland, but I was working for Uber London. So all my dealing was with Uber London. Like whenever I had to go and see Uber, I would go to Uber's London office. I would speak to their London manager. So my working relationship was with the London team, but my contract was with Uber in Holland. And this is Uber's argument. And I'm just giving you an example here just to explain the contract. Now the tribunal were very quick to look at that and say, look, we don't want to look at this contract. We want to see what is really happening, the real working relationship. For example, yes, he signed a contract saying he works for Uber BV. His money comes in from Uber BV into his account. But the reality is he works for Uber London for this reason. And what it showed in our case is Uber was so good because they had knew what they were doing. So they set up the sham bogus contract in order to deny us our rights. So it's not like it just happened accidentally. They actually looked at the whole model. They sat down and thought, okay, how could we exploit these people and how could we deny them their rights? And one of the things was the tribunal was willing to look at the whole, working relationship of what was really happening, forget the contract. And therefore, the judge laid out 16 reasons why we were workers, which entitled us to that rate. But even then, Uber knew that we were workers, but they continued to fight us. And they fought us for 6 long years. We went through various courts. We went to the appeal tribunal. We went to the High Court. We went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And even when we won at the Supreme Court the same day, Uber turned around and they said, look, this ruling only applies to the 25 claimants and not the rest. So they were trying to do everything they can to get away from it.
Can I just make a clarification for the Czech audience that the Supreme Court is the highest judicial authority in the country that interprets the law, it interprets the principles of the law, and the company comes back with the audacity to say, this is, this just affects 25 people. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so the point was, look, Uber did everything to fight it. They knew what was happening. They knew they could, they often talk about this flexibility. And I sort of disagree because an average driver here in London is working 70 hours a week, okay? And then when you work out the average, it's £5 an hour, okay? But as a driver, you need to work 35 hours just to offset your expenses. What we mean by 35 hours, that's like when you work 35 hours, that's when you start making money. So you don't make money before that, yeah? So basically...
what are those expenses that you have to offset?
So you have your fuel, your gas, your petrol money. You also have, your hire and reward insurance, they call it, the public liability insurance. You also have, like your wears and tears, and we're talking about the licensing cost. Don't forget, we're regulated by Transport for London. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff. But just to give you an example, the difference between us and other gig workers is we have X amount of expenses before we could start making money. Okay, so the problem we have, so the problem we have is you have to work, and the biggest problem we had is the waiting time. So even though Uber has now made some amendment, and it's a massive achievement for us guys, because this was a fight that we started 7 years ago, and for Uber to at least give some workers' right, especially for the engaged time, it's some achievement, but it doesn't really deal with the issue, because the main issue is when we're sitting around waiting empty. So I could be sitting in my car waiting for a job. Uber would say I'm not working, but actually I am working. So I could work like 10 hours in a day, and I might be just POB. Like when we say POB, that means passenger on board for 4 hours. Okay, so that means there's 6 hours that I'm not getting paid for. And the Supreme Court, and the best thing about this case was, as we went through various stages, is the Supreme Court clarified the working time, and that was from log on to log off. And you can see Uber still resisting to fight it, to make sure that they have that ability to oversupply the market. Now, when we look at these models like Uber, they rely on exploiting people. And they heavily rely on BME workers because these people are desperate.
Black ethnic minority.
Yeah, that's it. So BME stands for Black Ethnic Minority Community. So, like these are people that are desperate. And so the point is, and I don't like saying this, we will find people that would work for £2 an hour, £3 an hour. And the reason being is they're desperate, they're stuck in a situation where they need some kind of income and they're happy to, forfeit their rights just so they got some kind of income.
Why is it mostly Black and ethnic minorities? Because I'm trying to observe actually who is delivering food, who is driving the cars, and it is indeed mostly ethnic minorities and people from migrant communities in Britain. So can you explain that a little bit?
So basically in London, like I'm just talking about London here, so 96% of the drivers, the licensed drivers by Transport London, 96% are from Black minority ethnic communities, yeah? And at the same time, if you look at the black taxis, the London traditional black taxi, 84% of them are white British. So you see that imbalance. So the regulator is failing to do a job, and they sort of play that divide and conquer, where they'll play the Uber drivers against the taxis and taxis against Uber. But the problem we have is there is a lot of discrimination, generally speaking. So it's like myself, when I was looking for an IT job, I felt that it was easier to continue doing what I was doing than go into these job interviews one after another. Maybe certain people would get the job. So there was an element of discrimination in the background. So it was to get rid of it. So we have a lot of Muslim drivers here in London. So they like to pray. They don't mind working longer hours as long as they could take certain breaks. You get some people that come, like migrant people that come here sometimes. What they want to do is work for good 9-10 months and then go on holiday for 2 months back into their home countries. So they have to book them. Like there's certain, like there's so many reasons behind it. But the point is, the law has a purpose, and that's to stop companies from exploiting people, like such as the national minimum wage, and vice versa. Even if someone was desperate, the law is there to protect them. And this is where our worker status comes in, because it puts a floor in the market. That means that's the lowest you earn. So it means if I go out to work today, and let's say the minimum wage is £8, I'm just giving £8 an hour. So if I work 10 hours, I should be earning £80 after my expenses. And I know that at least I have something, rather than going out there all day. Rather than going out there all day and coming home maybe with £10. For the whole day, and we were seeing those kind of figures during the pandemic.
What's all day for me? This is really striking when I talk to Uber drivers and I hear the hours that they work. So none of them works 7 or 8 hours. We are talking about 10, 12 hours. So when I hear that, it really feels like we are turning the clock back 100 years prior to establishing workers' rights and minimum and the maximum working hours per week. Can you talk about that?
That's right. I mean, because we got to look at the issues about issues like people ask me this a lot, like what are the barriers organizing these drivers? And one of the biggest problem we had was there's no fixed place of work, and drivers were isolated with this app, where back in the traditional days people used to be working in you'll go back to your base and you meet people. And the next issue was the employment status. Like I mentioned, people like the flexibility. So they prefer to work long hours. They're happy to work long hours. And that's because they don't understand the law. And that's where we need to educate these guys and explain to them, where a driver is working 70 hours. But and I'm just saying for argument's sake, let's say we were employees of Uber. Forget the worker status. We were employees. So we'd be working 40 hours and earning the same money as what we would if we were if we were working 80 hours, for example. But we'd have more rights like pension, paternity, maternity, the right to unfair dismissal, we'll have a better quality of life because we're spending time at home. So it's no life when you're actually sleeping in your cars. You know, you're not seeing your family. You know, that depression, your mental health, and all that kind of stuff gets into you. And like I said, another issue that we had, because it's BME workers, you know, like they're scared of discrimination, like, you know, like there's lack of like the point is the government is doing a bad job on enforcing and holding companies responsible. So what the workers don't want to be is used as a scapegoat in the middle. So they try and stay away from that. And secondly, it's lack of resources. You know, like we don't have the resources. So a worker who's struggling to, like, hands and mouth, like they're struggling to earn money to feed their family, they can't be protesting. So, you know, like when we talk about history, like these rights were won by our forefathers, our grandfathers. They've done a great job. Trade union done a great job. You know, like the bigger trade unions back in the days. Now, you know, I'm not here to knock the bigger unions, but I'm just giving you examples. Like my father come from Pakistan back in the 1960s and 70s, and he couldn't speak a word of English. My father never been inside a courtroom. He doesn't understand the laws, like he doesn't know all the laws and stuff. Like it's not like what I meant, like, you know, and when I sit with my father and his friend, and when they talk about back in the days when they were factory workers, you know, the bigger unions, what they were doing is they would get a shop steward to go into these workplaces who worked with them. They would train him up, educate him right, but they weren't like education where they went on these lovely course for 2-3 weeks and come back and then they write books. It was more about being with the workers. So the shop steward like would actually control the workplace, and he was in charge, and the union empowered him and gave him that resources, saying you're in charge, this is your business or whatever, you run it. So if something went wrong, and let's say like my dad, he had an issue, he'll go to shop steward would say to the manager, you need to sort this out, otherwise, you know, we're all coming together to sort it out ourselves. Now the bosses were scared of these migrant workers, not because they knew the law or not because they had money, but the fact that is they had that unity and they had that union control. So for example, they could all walk out that very minute and shut the whole place down. And that was more powerful, and that's what they were scared about. And they'd done it many times where my father and I hear them talk and laugh about it, where they would go outside on a strike and together, you know, and the bosses would then literally beg them to come back in and meet their demands. And that was the power they had. Where in my case, I had to fight a lengthy 6 years battle. And really, generally speaking, I was lucky we were able to get pro bono, like barristers and solicitors that helped us free because they wanted to fight this cause. But on an average, like in a real world, a worker just does not have 6 years to put their life on hold to fight a lengthy battle, and they don't have the resources, the money. And no solicitor would really want to be fighting that for them, like spend millions up against a company like Giants. So I'm not saying like, and the problem we're seeing with the bigger unions now is they forgot that it become too corporate and they train all these staff and people, but those staff are not in touch with the day-to-day worker. And what they went wrong is they used to empower the workers and that workplace by putting that person there who was empowered, yeah. And then at the same time, you know, like we got to do like big mixture of. But what I'm saying is, it's become too corporate. It's all about trying to settle, and they're not organizing. So myself, I didn't choose to become a trade union. I got forced into it. You know, like I mentioned, like my experience when I come in 2006, and then things were going wrong at Uber. I met James Farrow. We started organizing. So we done it because it was the right thing to do. We didn't do it because, you know, we wanted it look good on our CVs or or like or any money or financial gain.
Career trajectory.
Yeah, so we've done it for the
because you're not working in a factory like your father. You are working in a field where there are hundreds of dispersed drivers. So how do you organize workers in such?
Well, this is the thing. Like I mentioned, like it's there's a lot of things to go, but the main thing about us and what we always try to do is empower our workers, our drivers. Yeah. So, for example, the real thing comes down to shoe leather organizing. You know, so you got to be able to go there, get your hands dirty, be at the car park where the drivers are, speak to drivers, help the drivers. You got to be relentless, yeah. And one of the thing about us, like we were consistent. Like we used to have regular meetings every month where drivers would turn up. Maybe they might turn up once and never come again, but at least they knew we were there. So when we organized protests, stuff like that, people know who we were. And like I said, one of the thing about it was we weren't getting no financial gains, and people knew we're doing. Sorry, people knew we're doing what we're doing for the right reason. And secondly, like you got to run campaigns. So we ran many campaigns. We still continued, like we have a campaign coming up against Bolt in a few days' time. So going forward, you know, you have to run protests. You have to be able to strike. You got to do some kind of lobbying to politicians. All those kind of stuff, they come hand in hand. And then thirdly, you do need to do some legal action, but they have to work together. You can't have just be running to the high court every 5 minutes and have no organizing, like recruiting members, stuff like that, and running no campaigns. Yeah. So they all work hand in hand. Now, the biggest thing, like I mentioned, our members are BME members. Yeah, a lot of them are Muslim. So one of the things is, how do you engage with these communities? And if you look at the bigger unions, they don't engage with these communities or day to day.
Not necessarily with workers, but with the broader.
Yeah, the workers and the community. So, for example, like just to give you an example, like as I mentioned, they're Muslim. So what we used to do is every Ramadan we would have an iftar event. Yeah. So what is happening is when we have an iftar event, the workers, the drivers, Uber drivers, would come down and they open a fast. But it's not just for the Muslim. Even the non-Muslim Uber drivers would come. And we sit down, we'll open our fast, have a meal together, have a chat. But that engaged the community, and those people feel that, look, these people respect us, and you build their trust and that relationship. So you know they feel part of that movement. So you have to. And the next thing that we're doing is within our committees, like organization, we look for leaders in different communities. For example, the Turkish leader, a driver from the Turkish community, a driver from the Somalian community. So they're part of this committee. So when we sit down, drivers from different communities have an active input and they feel part of it. Where when you look at the bigger unions, you just, and don't take this the wrong way, like you just see corporate white middle class people sitting there earning a nice salary. They're not living on the minimum wage, or they don't know what it's like to be on a living wage. Yeah, so you know, and I'm not knocking that. I'm not against people getting paid, especially unions, because I see the work they do. But the point is, you have to have a balance. You got to be in touch with the workers. You got to understand how the workers feel. Now, you know, it's like myself and James. Like I come out of this trade in 2016. I got pushed out when I got deactivated from Uber. So I went back into the IT. So I was lucky that I'm still an employee now. I work as an IT contractor. I work 4 days and then I have 4 off. But it gives me that flexibility to organize, you know, in my free time as a volunteer. I don't get paid, nor does James. No one at our union gets paid. But we believe in the cause and we do it because we enjoy doing stuff. So what makes me feel good is, as a union, forget the bigger issue. On a day-to-day, we help drivers. Like I help drivers get the license back. We help drivers. Like even today, James is at magistrate court with a driver who's had his license revoked unfairly. So you know, like you have to be able to help drivers on a day-to-day basis. So let's say a driver got assaulted. Even though he got assaulted, there's nothing I could do to make it better. But I would go down there to see him and help him, ask him, say, should I go with you to the police station? How could I support you? And that moral support is what means a lot to people. And like I said, if you could save someone's livelihood, you know, especially a lot of people from migrant communities, that this is the only job they know. And the minute they lose their license, they have no source of income. And we saw it with the facial recognition, where we're seeing Uber coming more onto the data side, where you know, like the algorithm, the way they're being managed, and we see drivers getting dismissed from the platform for fraud, but they didn't commit no fraud. What they done is cancel jobs. So if you cancel so many jobs, Uber will dismiss you or kick you, block you from the app, saying you committed a fraud, which you haven't, and they'll report you to the regulator, Transport for London, saying we got rid of this driver because he committed a fraud, which is it. So you, as a regulator, is looking at it saying this driver has committed a fraud, so let's get rid of his license. So then you got a driver going into the magistrate court trying to explain how he did not commit a fraud, because Uber won't be there. So we got all these issues, and then we got the same kind of thing happening now, and we're seeing more of that. Is with the facial recognition. And again, if you look at Microsoft, and you probably read some of our campaigns around Holland around this, is Microsoft themselves have confirmed that there is an issue with facial recognition. It doesn't work on people of color. It doesn't work on women's. Yeah, but which we all know about. But at the same time, Uber is allowing, like they're causing so much harm to these workers by reporting them. So we had a lot of our members that actually been out of work for 6-7 months, and they've been completely innocent.
They've been out of work because of an algorithm decision which they cannot challenge.
That's correct. That's correct. So one of the things as a union, and what we're doing different, is we actually trying to build a data trust. So we believe the workers should be in charge of their own data. We should have the transparency in our data, so we should know what kind of details, everything they have. We should have the right to object to this data. So in order to get that, once we got that data, we can see who's getting the work, how the algorithms are working, if there's any discrimination, and most importantly, we could use that data for collective bargaining.
How?
When you could see everything, and you could it should be part of the deal with any company, like such as Uber, when we're trying to negotiate a deal.
Oh, you need personal data, access to contact.
Yeah, for whole drive. It's different, when I look at your data, but when we got all of it together as a union, it gives us control. And we're going to see more of this as we go into the bigger unions. As we go into more technology. And this is where the bigger unions are lacking behind in this. And what we're also now seeing, sorry, just touching on that, the union topic, like I said, the bigger unions are great unions, and they still can do a lot more because they have the resources. They just need to get the structure right, but they can't be going in and waving a white flag and doing deals just to end the chapter. So for example, I was one of the claimants that won my rights for Uber drivers, where the judge cleared the working time. So why should I settle for less now? Why should I go into Uber and sign a deal and say, look, we're happy with what we have, and let's just go forward? No, the point is they need to obey and respect or comply with the legal minimum before we go to the next, before we start actually talking about the bigger issues. Now, we got to look at, we're seeing more and more smaller unions coming up, but the thing is, it's we're seeing more of these academics where people are coming over, trying to run these smaller unions, but these unions are heavily reliant on external funding, so it's not the workers, if the members left or if they had no external, they'll collapse. At the same time, it's, I believe that if you are academics or a union, you should be supporting the workers, and the workers should be empowered. So in any workplace, like I mentioned with my father's situation, they should empower the workers, so the workers are then running and leading the organization. And it's like ADCU, we grow so massively. There was a time when people were scared to join, and everyone used to say you cannot organize these Uber drivers, and these drivers, like the BME communities, and Uber found this loophole, a great shady area where they knew these guys would never join a trade union, but we broke that barrier, and we're at a position where we have so many members joining us that we can't cope with the demand, but at the same time we're able to sustain ourselves without any external funding. So we're truly independent, and that's the position you need to be in order to go forward. And that's where I think that's the bigger kind of thing there. But anyway, I've been going on. We're running out of time. So sorry.
But at least we are finishing on a positive note, because from what you are saying, it sounds like there is a possibility of workers in a very deprivileged position in the country due to their migrant status and due to their racialization, who still managed to achieve something incredible, who still, like your group, managed to achieve the ruling of the Supreme Court, and the work that your union and other grassroots unions are doing, which is trying to organize workers from below, which is really, really important. I will just make one final remark that it does make a difference whether one works in a unionized workplace. So I happen to work in a unionized workplace, which is a very privileged position when it comes to any negotiation about any issue that may affect the workload. So we might be white collar or like office people, but we still depend on wages. It's not that I can just go and do nothing. And that relationship is a power relationship. So it is really, really important to be able to come together and do what you have done. So congratulations for that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like I said, unions are very important. I just like some of the stuff that I mentioned, I talked about, was based on my experience within the driving industry. So it might not apply in everything, but when we're looking at, I also work on an international alliance. So I'm one of the board members, and this is something that I set up last year. So we're actually working with drivers from 23 different countries, and you start seeing more of us around European. But the point was, look, this issue around employment, it affects everyone around the world. Especially we're seeing this around Europe, where people are trying to waive our rights, which were rights which are fought for. And the bigger trade unions, and what I mean, they're still great, and I keep saying this, they are great unions, but they need to start, making sure that we don't get rid of laws we had. We don't need new laws. The problem we have is there's lack of enforcement. So we could, like I said, the law exists, but then you got companies like Uber, they could afford not to obey the law because they got so much money, influence, they could go out and hire lobby. But what we have is the people power. And if we unions and the bigger unions actually listen to the workers, if there's any deals done, they should consult with the workers. And that's how we gain that control and the power. And that is the most important thing. And just to so I get, like, since I won against Uber, like, everyone contacts me, like, even the drivers, the same drivers that didn't used to think we would ever be able to stand up against Uber. So for example, like London's biggest airport, Heathrow Airport, like, there's a big massive car park where drivers go and park up while they wait for a job. And I often go in there every 2 weeks to speak to drivers, recruit drivers, talk to drivers. And you get a lot of drivers that come up to me and James to take pictures with us, but I sort of feel embarrassed because, I turn around and say, why do you want a picture with me? Because we're all brothers and sisters. Like, this is all of our fight. But it just goes to show that people and the workers sort of think someone else needs to fight. They fight for them. And that is the wrong, what's that word? Like, they shouldn't be thinking like that. They should be thinking, look, this is my fight. And they should be coming to me, how could I join the fight? How could I fight with you? And how could we make this change? It's not saying you're doing a great job and carry on, But, like, I'm no one special. Like, I come from an average background, and I just did what I could, and I volunteered my time. But if we're all doing the same thing, the world would be a lot better place. And that's, like, my message. That, look, we just got to continue doing what we're doing, and everyone plays a small role in it, because one person on his own can't achieve anything. It's the same with me and James. Like, there's a lot of drivers that helped us over the years. We had some great solicitors, barristers, and at the same time, there has been some great academics that I have worked with and that supported me. For example, like Todd Wolfson from Philadelphia. I met him 5 years ago. He's doing some research, but he's been a friend where he guided me through many processes. And that's what we need. We need people coming and helping us and supporting us, not hijacking the movement. Like, how could we help? What could we do to make things easier for you as workers? And that's what we need more of.
Thank you very much, Yaseen. It was Yaseenem Aslamem, one of the claimants in the case against Uber. And my name is Barbora Černušáková. Thank you for watching.